Sometimes, if you listen really hard, you can almost hear it.
Our first ever instant star is...
You're it, girl. You're the real thing.
That moment your life changes.
It's about a girl who is just about to fly off and see the world.
Forever.
Jude Harrison!
Hello and welcome to The Breakdown, an Instant Star Rewatch podcast. We have a very special guest with us today. Today we are joined by the one and only Stephen Stohn. Thanks, Stephen. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be here and to relive some of the memories from back in the day. Now we're going all the way back to 2004.
Yes.
I don't think it went on the air till 2005, but we were shooting it in 2004.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk all things season 1. And I'd love to go back to the very beginning. What was the initial inspiration for Instant Star and how did it even become a TV show?
I'm both a lawyer and a television producer. And as it happened, I was the lawyer on the first season of Canadian Idol. Now, I'm sure there was an Australian Idol. There certainly was an American Idol. And in that, it's actually an interesting backstory to Instant Star because I got to see a lot of what went on behind the Idol show. And one of the things that goes on, which people at home wouldn't necessarily think of, is you've got, say, thousands of contestants, and they're, gradually being winnowed down. And of course, there's a whole bunch of episodes with lots of tears where people are sent home and lots of, whooping with their families and hugging and kissing because they've gotten the ticket to go forward one more week. But then you're starting to get closer to the real show itself, where you've got the final, whether it's 10 or however many competitors. And of course, the winner wins a recording contract and a bunch of other contracts. But the question is, if you think about it, how does, a recording contract is 60 pages long. They usually take months to negotiate. How is it that all of a sudden, one day they've won the show and then the next day there's a single released and everything going on? Well, the answer is that they're preparing in advance. And when you get down to about 100 competitors, they bring in some lawyers, and the lawyers do a kind of, I call it lawyer idol, where the lawyers speak to the competitors and, talk about what's coming up. And then the competitors all choose one single lawyer who will represent them if they proceed further. And that's because you couldn't have 100 different lawyers, negotiating different contracts. It would just be a mess. So the lawyer is chosen. In the first couple of years, it was me. And then I didn't do anything for a while. But when it got down to the final 10, I think it was actually 11 in the first year of Canadian Idol. Then suddenly we got the contracts. Then I would negotiate. I'd go back and I'd explain clause by clause what was going through, not just the recording agreement. There was a music publishing agreement, a merchandising agreement, and a management agreement. We would have some very intensive times as everything was whittled down. And then you could not go to the final shows unless everything had been signed.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
So all the agreements were set in advance. Meanwhile, in order to get a song out immediately after the winning episode, there were already songwriters who were writing what would be the first single at the very least. And in fact, in our case, in Canadian Idol, they wrote virtually the entire album. They didn't know who was singing. But they'd written the song so that everything could go out very smoothly. So knowing all that and getting to know the competitors, I got to know them very well. And on the night of the first live telecast, with the 10 or 11 there. I was sitting almost in the front row with my wife, Linda. And we saw it, and it was really exciting for me because I'd known them all, and now I was seeing them, really perform under pressure, and it was kind of thrilling. But Linda turned to me and said, this would make a really excellent television show, not the actual winning. She said, do they know what will happen once they win? And I turned to her and I said, I don't think they do. We knew through producing the Degrassi series and working with kids that really getting on the show, that winning is only the beginning. They think of it as, oh, now this is the ticket to that. No, the drama has only begun once we win. And during one of the commercial breaks, I got really excited and said, you know what? If we did something like this and we started with the person winning, then we could create, a new song every episode. We could do all these different kind of things. And so we got very excited and went back and over the next month developed a pitch deck for the show itself.
Amazing. I got chills when you were talking about that because it's true. Like everything begins after they win the show.
Yes. Yeah. And we'd seen in our Degrassi series, we'd watched young performers become stars, not in the music sense, but become stars. And what does it do to their lives? And in some ways, it shouldn't do very much. They're still just ordinary kids, and you want to keep them as ordinary and normal as possible. But on the other hand, in many ways, they can't be normal anymore. They aren't normal anymore.
Yeah. Wow.
So what was the casting process like? Who was cast first and who was the hardest, do you think, to cast?
It's interesting in that because the easiest and the hardest was Alex. Once we been ordered for the show, it was absolutely key that she be cast first. Because after in the casting process, whatever show you do, you want to have your leads, in this case, the lead. And then you want, as other people come in, you want to have them read with the lead to see what kind of chemistry there is. Does it seem to work or not? So as it happened, even before we started casting, I was talking about the show, the fact that we gotten ordered with a friend of mine in Vancouver, Belinda Metz, who had songs out on the charts in Canada and had done fairly well. And she was in a series called Kung Fu at the time, but she had been in a series called So Weird, and so it performed with Alex. And I didn't know this at the time, but I was chatting with Belinda and said, we aren't starting yet, but we're going to be casting. And she said, look no further. I know exactly. She's got a 4-octave range. She's, writing her own songs. She's doing all this. She would be perfect. So sure enough, she got Alex on tape. Toronto is 3,000 miles from Vancouver. So they just sent a tape in. And I was convinced then. And I went to the others in the team and said, I think we've found, our Jude. And they quite properly said, no, we have to go through the process. We've really got to do it. So we cast about 600 young actors. And some of them were people we knew. There was one that was from Degrassi. There was one that actually was a runner-up on Canadian Idol that I'd known from there. But there were 600 who came in. And at the very end of the day, of course, who won the audition? We could have saved months of casting, but it was Alex. And then after that, it was a more normal process. Casting, I love the casting process. I don't normally sit in the room right at the very beginning as they're winnowing the cast down or the potential cast down. But it's interesting what you're looking for. People look different on camera than they do in person. And there's some people who you meet them, say, on the street and you think, okay, well, they're okay looking. You see them on camera and you go, wow, is that person good looking? And, depending on what role you're casting, that may be a good thing or a bad thing. But also, we're looking not just particularly with young actors who still are learning the craft, and we're not expecting them to be Shakespearean actors by any chance. We're looking for a couple of things. One is how well do they take direction? So if you're saying, okay, well, try that again, but let's pretend that you're angry this time, or to try that again, and now you're just feeling hurt and you're trying to bury your anger, and just see what they come up with. Not that they necessarily get it perfect, but that they're trying. In other words, that they're coachable. But the most important one, the number one thing, and really for my own purpose, the only thing I'm looking for is vulnerability. I want somebody who just lets what's inside of them, no matter what character they're portraying, there's something inside of them that is coming out onto the screen and makes them vulnerable, which means they're approachable, which means they can engage with an audience. So for all the other cast, we would winnow them down, then we would have them come in and interact with each other and with Alex, and gradually it all came together.
What did each actor bring to the character besides the vulnerability and the?
Well, it's interesting, and I'm actually going to answer a slightly different question, which is, but I think it will answer your question in the end. They don't know. I'll answer your question. They don't know, and we don't know. So if you think about it, if you pretend that you're a producer and you've got the first season of a show coming up, you've got the cast together, but you've got writers who have never seen them, acting, and certainly not acting the scripts that they're creating, and the writers don't know what strengths or weaknesses they bring. They don't even know, is the lead actor going to be wearing red hair or blonde hair or anything like that. And by the way, that was a huge topic of conversation. The broadcaster insisted on red hair, and we were not in favor of it. But if the broadcaster wanted red hair, in the end, the broadcaster got red hair. But if you think about it, it's hard. The first couple of scripts, those are usually the ones that are worked on the most in advance, because you're working on them. You're then selling the broadcaster. You're using them to help cast and other things. Then once the show is ordered, you bring in a writing team. Now the writers are the key writers who you worked on for the first couple of scripts. They, have a lot better sense of the overall story and the character arcs. But the new writers have their own ideas, which is fantastic because they bring freshness to it. But they're not as imbued with the central ethos of the show. So scripts 3 and 4, when you're starting to get into those scripts with the sort of the newer writers, not knowing how the actors, they haven't seen them in an episode yet, not knowing, is this particular actor good with comedy? Is this particular actor, particularly good with showing emotion? Those are the more difficult scripts to go through, and things can tend to sort of slide. There's sort of two areas in the arc of a season that are, to me as a producer, dangerous. Sort of the episode 3, 4, sort of in that area, and then getting near the end, not the final episode or couple of episodes, because usually the writers and everyone, we all know where we want to end up. Right. But it's the ones sort of closer to the end. If it's 13 episodes, you're maybe looking at, 10 or something like episode 10 or in that range where people are getting tired. Now they know the characters, they've seen them on stage, they know their strengths and weaknesses, but it's there tends to be a bit of a lapse. So as a producer, you're trying to shore up those times, but it's a hard task, particularly for the earlier episodes, the 3 and episodes 3 and 4, where you're learning so much, but you're doing casting, you're building sets, everything is being formulated from the beginning, and you don't know what works and doesn't work. And then finally, you're starting to see not just, rough dailies, but you're actually seeing episodes come together. And of course, in our case, add that onto the even more difficult part, or challenging and wonderful part of trying to marry, the one key song and other music with the scriptwriters. So the songwriters working with the scriptwriters, who then would hear what the songwriters had done and modify their scripts, and then go back and forth and trying to come up with interesting songs. So you've got all these things going on, and but to go back to your question, in the very beginning, we didn't know who was strong. We didn't know that Chris Turner really was, had an excellent sense of comedic timing. Just to use one example. But we learned, and you learn as you go along, and you make some mistakes, and you just plow on through. And by the way, one thing that people often don't think about is they think, oh, feature films, television, it's sort of the same thing, except a feature's 2 hours. And no, television is relentless. You're producing, you've got however many days to produce an episode, and then the next episode, and then the next episode. And if the script isn't working, you're shooting it. You don't have any choice, because you've got an air date, and you're trying to patch and do whatever you can as it moves along. I love it for that reason. It's yeah.
Yes.
Talk about what it was like filming season 1. I mean, I often hear other TV shows say that the first season, there's something magic about it because no one in the world knows who anyone is yet. So everyone can just kind of have fun and really just almost let themselves go on set in a good way. So what was season 1 like to film, and what was it like on set for everyone?
Well, of course, I mean, you've got so much energy. You've got a young cast and a crew, and in our case, compared to American shows, a smaller crew than American shows would have, and a very protective environment because we shot in our own. Linda and I had bought this warehouse, this 100,000 square foot warehouse. That over the course of, there was another show we did, and then Degrassi, and we were shooting Degrassi at the same time. So what we would do is shoot a couple of episodes of Degrassi, then shoot, 2, 3, 4 episodes of Instant Star, then shoot some Degrassi, and then go back and forth. But using the same crew, different cast, of course, on each show. But you're in the same environment. And a lot of shows, you've got the writers are in LA and the executives are in New York and they're shooting in Atlanta. They're editing, someplace else. In our case, the editors, the writers, everybody was in the same location. So you'd have lunch together. You'd walk down the hall, you'd solve problems, you'd run in, oh, I was thinking about in that episode, why don't we go with the red dress or something like that. So everybody got to know each other. And in the case of Instant Star, people hadn't done a show like this before. I mean, we were trying to figure out how to run songwriter camps, how to marry the music with the show, and on top of creating new believable characters. And we were just all so into it.
Amazing.
What was your favorite episode of season 1 to film?
In some ways, episodes are like children. You don't want to have favorites.
Favorites, I'm sure.
Actually, the way I think of episodes, and this will be different from the way you think of them, because I'm not the director. And, I wouldn't be on set a lot. I would go down to set, and in my office, I had a screen that was tied into the camera so I could see everything that was going on. But I tried to stay out of their way. Now, usually maybe once a day, but maybe less often, I'd go down just to tell everybody they're doing a great job and, and just be there. So if they've got any questions, we can, or if there's something going wrong, I can, relay it to the right person. But the area that I really love, and it always, because as a lawyer, I'd worked with a lot of musicians, and I also at the same time was producing Canada's answer to the Grammys, the Juno Awards, which was a once a year award. And so I was used to, putting on shows, but I was mostly, it was music that I loved. So you might think of an episode by its title. You might say, oh, it's, Unsweet 16, and I forget what number that is. Or you might say it's 111 if that's what when Unsweet 16 was. I think of it, I don't even know which episode Unsweet 16 is, but I think of the episodes as Time to Be Your 21, or, I'm in love with my guitar, or Temporary Insanity. And that sort of triggers what I remember about the episode. So I am influenced by how much I not just like the song as a song, but the process in creating how it was presented. So I'll give you an example. Waste My Time is not necessarily as a song one of my favorite songs in the history of music, but working with, because we took the song, it didn't have sort of rap lyrics. When the scriptwriters wanted to have sort of a mashup, and it was kind of an allegory. They were mashing up in person, they were mashing up musical styles, and we wanted the song to be a mashup. Well, creating that song, it wasn't easy, but when it actually succeeded, I think it was far better than the original Just Waste My Time on its own. And so I look back very fondly on those episodes. Now, they may or may not be the best episodes of the season, but I look back fondly on that. Probably my favorite song of season 1. Oh, I've got a few of them. Time to Be Your 21. I've always been a fan of Time to Be Your 21. Skin, of course, is a favorite. It just not only being a good song, but it mirrored the script so beautifully. At the very end, or near the end, when Jude is looking out and she sees, it's really the 4 guys, but the 3 guys who have, just been a total pain in some way, one way or another, or at least love, pain. It became very difficult for her to tell which it was. But they're all there in the audience looking on. The 4th, of course, would be Jamie, who I think at the time wasn't difficult for her, but he nevertheless was a burr in the saddle in some ways. And she's talking about, and of course, each of the guys, the 3 anyway, thought the song was about them.
Yeah.
And it was about them. It happened to be about all 3 of them also at the same time. So I really liked that episode. I'm a fan of, I just like the song Temporary Insanity. It reflected the episode nicely. I'm just trying to remember what other songs. There are some songs that I didn't like, so I don't really remember what episode Me Out of Me was in. My least favorite episode, I can say very quickly, was I'm in Love with My Guitar. And not because I didn't like the song. I mean, it was an okay song. It wasn't an all-time great song, but it had an interesting sort of approach. But so now I'm answering the absolute opposite question. But I'm not just going to say which episode
No, that's fine.
I didn't like. I'll tell you why I didn't like it. And I mean, I talked before about, it's difficult when you get into that area of the season and you're learning. But to me, there were a few things going on. And the most important is the 3rd thing, but I'll start with 2 others of them. One was, first of all, it was completely unbelievable that, she didn't even have songs out on the charts yet and things like that. And they're doing a live hit at her school. It's like, no, that just doesn't happen. Now, I would have this battle with the scriptwriters all the time because I knew, I'd worked on records. I'd written songs myself that had been in the top 10 in Canada. I knew how it all worked. And you don't suddenly show up with a film crew at somebody's. So I knew that was wrong. The second thing, which didn't make sense to me, was, all of a sudden, out of the blue, there's a We Hate Jude or whatever it was, or Jude with an X or whatever movement going. Well, why? I mean, Sadie and Jude, there was no history of them being hated by the school. And Canadians tend to be relatively polite. They're not going to pull a stunt like that. So that was that. I'm just thinking of one funny thing. There's a little bit of trivia that no one has ever picked up on, but I will tell you at the end of this. But the third thing was, and it was a trouble for me as we found out all the way through the season, and that was the parents. We wanted to have Jude centered in three places: the record company and her fans, but also school, trying to be normal, trying to have the rhythms and trying to have, a social life at her school and to have a family life. We didn't want to just make it, it's just all about this bubble in the music industry. But the story, and it was in I'm in Love with My Guitar, it just didn't seem plausible to me that this travel agent would write a note, an incriminating note on something that was going home. And so and then later on, when she's sort of touching his face in some episode later on, I don't know whether they were back at the school, there was something happening. It was like, no, you idiot. I mean, you just don't do that. So we really found that the parent side wasn't really working. It was great for Skin because you had the father having to face up with some things. So I think that part worked. But anyway, by the time we went back in I'm in Love with My Guitar, I'm sort of going, okay, yeah. And, it sort of gets together and they love Jude in the end and, roll tail credits and whew, we got through another one. But I'll tell you something, and I haven't done this since we shot the show. At the time, we didn't have a huge budget, and we didn't have a budget. We were doing a lot of shooting for the actual concert on the stage, and we couldn't afford to have extras filling the room. So a lot of the people that you see in there are actually blow up balloons.
What?
Not if I think you'll be able to pick it up. And when we tried in post-production to make them dark so that you couldn't see, the ones in the front row, of course, were sort of doing things. But the ones in the back, you can sort of see they're just sort of sitting there, and they've got different faces on them. But someone had to go and blow up the people and put them in the chairs.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
So in that sense, I kind of like that episode.
I'm going to have to
I'm
rewatch
gonna
that.
have to pay attention next time I watch it.
Let's talk about the music, because music is such a central part of the whole show. What was it like writing the music for season 1, and what was the hardest song that people found to write?
There was no particularly hardest song to write, although I guess maybe working on the mashup, the Waste My Time mashup, was sort of difficult to try and do it together. But what we did on Canadian Idol, actually, I'll go back in history. Even before Canadian Idol went on, a large record company guy, Stuart Copeland, owned a chateau in France. And his brother, I may have the names wrong, but his brother was in, the IRS, it was IRS Records. And Stuart Copeland, what was his band? Anyway, I'm forgetting about it. But they made a lot of money in the music industry. And so the business brother owned this chateau, and he had a recording studio in it. And he had the right idea of bringing in a whole bunch of hit songwriters and hit artists and working with them to sort of just sit there over a couple of weeks and create songs. But it was better than that. He then brought in a lot of the artists that were on his own label or that he was managing. So these were young artists who weren't famous, and they all worked together. And they created some songs, and it worked really, really well. So Canadian Idol, and I guess all the other idols around the world, took this format. So there were songwriter camps. The problem in the Idol camp, and certainly the first Idol year, is you've got a group of writers, and they would break them down into, three groups of 3 writers. There's someone who's particularly good on lyrics, someone who's particularly good on melody, and then somebody who's good at putting the track together. So they would work for the morning and just create a song. For Idol, it didn't really matter. They weren't reading a script and trying to tailor it to anything. They were just trying to write a hit song. And they didn't know who the artist would be. So they didn't know what genre it should be. They just wanted to do something that came from the heart. But that was the problem with the Idol process, because when the album came out and most of the songs had already been written, the actual artist or singer who won had very little input into the songs, wasn't implanting their particular style onto it in any way. So I think that's one reason that, most of the American Idol or Idol winners haven't gone on and sort of built a career, because the career is kind of shaky right from the beginning. It was kind of manufactured. Now, some obviously have gone on and done very well, but for the most part, not. But we were in a better position than that. So we had about, I think in the first season, it might not have been as many, but we rapidly learned from that, and we would have 15 writers over a week. And on the Monday morning, we would gather the writers and the script writers together, and the script writers would talk through what the storylines would be for, maybe it would be 3 episodes or something like that, and the kind of stuff. And then the songwriters would sort of get some ideas. So, if a script said, and Tommy's having trouble. He really likes Jude and he shouldn't like Jude. And she's 15 or 16 and he's 22, or, and then there's a line where I think he says to Quest at the other end, and Quest goes, yeah, but what if she was 21? And he says something like, oh, if she's 21, it's game over, I'm there. Yeah. And Jude overhears that. So they would use those sort of kernels and then come up with something. And I loved how that fit into the song, because remember in that episode when Jude plays the song just on her guitar at the beginning of the episode, she's playing it probably for Tommy, and she's going, time to be your only one, was the lyric. And then at the very end, when she says time to be your 21, I mean, it really, okay, that's, it's just so meaningful. So, so the songwriters knew the kind of themes, so they would write the songs, and it would start on a Monday. So they'd separate up into, if there were 12 people, there would be 4 groups of 3. And then the next day, and they'd try and write 2 songs. Then the next day they'd split up the groups and they'd switch around with different people and they'd go on. So they do that for 4 days. Then on the 5th day, the track people would try and put it together in a demo kind of form. And then we would have a barbecue at Linda's and my house, which was a nice house on the water. And we would, gather the script writers, the songwriters, some of the producers, and it was a totally magic time. We would have, we'd have vegetarian fare, but we have basically just hot dogs and hamburgers. It's the summertime. So at around, maybe 9 o'clock, the sun is sort of setting, and we finished our dessert and things like that. And the first group would come up and would hand me a CD of, 4 songs that they'd written, or 5 songs. And I just put the CD on, and we'd sit and we'd listen to the song. And what a wonderful audience, because everybody was absolutely rapt to listen to this song. And of course we would, we would clap. We were very, very appreciative of all the songs. Not all of the songs made it, but they were all good, solid songs. And in the emotional songs, I'm a crier, so I would cry during the emotional songs and doing that. And then we'd go away, and the writers would select which songs they wanted. Sometimes they would go back and say, "Oh, we'd like to use this song, but we'd like to make this shift in the lyrics, or we'd like to do something so it fits in better with the episode." And it would sort of go back and forth for a little bit. So no one song was necessarily more difficult than the others. It was just a complete explosion of creativity and talent. Monday morning, there was nothing. And Friday night, by 10:30, there were 15 brand new songs that were thrilling. And to this day, when I run into any of the songwriters, and some of them have written huge hits that have sold millions of copies for other artists and things like that, they say, no, the best time of my life was those songwriter camps, because they were given the kernel of an idea. It wasn't just, oh, I want to write a hit song. No, I want to write a song that's talking about how this young girl wants to be older so that she can experience more of life, and she's not, and try and get that emotion.
So you said that the songs were written for the episodes. Were any of the songs like standalone? I know on the album there's the Stupid Girl cover, but were any besides?
Yeah, Stupid Girl was different. Now, was that season 2 or season 3?
2.
Season 1, 2, yeah.
Yeah, season 2.
Season 2.
That was the head of Universal Records really liked the song and the group, and said if we use that in the episode, they would really push the album.
Okay.
So he said, okay, well, we can make that work.
Nice.
I don't think it necessarily worked. And in the end, did he push the album? No. That's the music for you. But mostly it wasn't standalone. The one in season 1 that was written before was Pick Up the Pieces, the Boys Attack song.
Okay.
And I'd heard that song. It was a local songwriter, Joel Feeney, and I'd heard it, and it was just him singing it. And I really liked the song. I'm a sucker for a pop song.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
it came back to it and said, could we layer some harmonies and make it sound like a boys band and things? And I think it worked gangbuster for that. I mean,
I love it.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yes. No, so that really worked. But that was really, those are a couple of the only standalone ones. Later on, my favorite song, but I don't want to spoil it, so maybe I shouldn't talk about it until we get to probably season 4. But anyway, I'll tell you that my favorite song was Perfect.
Oh.
And but that I just remembering that now because it was written by, and she's a very well-known Canadian artist now, but she wasn't well-known at the time, just more as a songwriter. And I love the song so much, I actually ended up meeting with the music publisher down in Los Angeles to get permission to use the song.
Wow.
But no, in almost all other cases, it was just written by the songwriter camp.
Okay.
If you had to choose one song from season 1 as a way to kind of introduce someone to the show and they hadn't seen it before, what song would you choose?
Now, that's an interesting question. Wouldn't be 24 Hours. I think that worked as a lead-off song, but to let them know what the show is about. It may not be your favorite song, because I like the up-tempo ones. I mean, the ballads are terrific because you can sell a ballad. Mm-hmm. You can sell a Your Eyes. You can sell a Time to Be Your 21. You can sell a Deeper when you're going into later. But the energy of, I was always a fan of Temporary Insanity. Now, I guess you're not talking about the episode. You're talking about just the song as a song.
Yeah, that would make people listen to it and say, oh, I'd love to watch it.
Yeah, no, the reason I like Temporary, first of all, I like the song, but it was kind of insane what was going on in that last episode, because I kind of liked it for that. I would say Skin.
Yeah, I say Skin.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because and you know, we talked earlier about vulnerability. That song in and of itself is a very vulnerable song, and it it teaches you what Jude is about.
Yeah.
By the way, completely different topic. I didn't want to call the show Instant Star.
Wow.
We'd used the title just when my wife and I were creating a pitch document. When you do a pitch document, you have sort of a short version where you just sort of sell it, and shorter the better, because broadcast executives don't read lots of paper. You really want to sell it in the first paragraph. So we came up with a title because we'd been there at Canadian Idol. We called it Instant Idol. And we knew that that could not be the title. We would never be allowed to use the phrase instant idol. With, you know, idol is a trademark term. And so, but everybody, it's a thing about titles. Everybody gets used to them. So everybody loved the title. And we said, well, we can't use it. Well, how about Instant Star? I said, no, it sounds like a reality show. It doesn't sound like a drama. It should be Hey Jude.
Yeah.
But the broadcasters and everybody, they'd fallen in love with Instant Idol. And if they couldn't have Instant Idol, it was going to be Instant Star. So, I mean, no, now we know what Instant Star is, but I don't think it's the right title, because I don't think if you just said it to somebody who didn't know anything about the show, Instant Star, oh yeah, that's one of those reality shows, they'd probably say.
Yeah.
Whereas Hey Jude, they go, oh.
Yeah, like who's Jude?
Yes. Anyway, I don't know what got me onto that, but
No, that's really interesting. I've literally just finished writing a pilot script, and I'm so attached to the title that I've chosen, and
right.
I feel like I will fight to the death to keep it as the title.
Well, one thing writers have to learn, and filmmakers have to learn, is, you know, whether it's a perfect line that you have, you know, the best line of all, if it's not moving the story forward, it's gone. And it drives the writers crazy. They want to be in the editing room. Oh, I worked ages over that line. Oh, it's perfect. It's an allegory. It's funny. It does this. I'm sorry, but the scene it's not pushing the scene forward.
Yeah. Kind of on that tangent, what plot line was the most fun to come up with in season 1? Because there's a few really good plot lines.
It's been such a long while since I've seen it. This is not a plot line so much. It's a scene, which is you probably got some other sort of thoughts, and I'll be interested in your thoughts. But which one was the episode where they're at the Darius's mansion, and
Number 2.
they all end, no, was that number 2? And they get in the pool. Okay. The pool scene itself, okay, going into the thing, that's funny. But what I really loved, and it actually wasn't written that way, something had gotten shot, and then suddenly it started raining and we couldn't shoot something else, and it created a problem. And so we mashed together what was meant to be 2 scenes into one. And it's Darius and Tom talking in that little alcove. And I just love the look on Darius's face, because Tommy's talking about all this, how mature Jude is, or something like that. And then they look out the window, and Darius just looks up and he says, yeah, I can see that. He sort of raises his eyebrow or something. And that, to me, that was so funny. And it worked together because it wasn't really meant to work like that. It only worked because something had gone wrong, so we had to fit it together, and then it worked perfectly.
That's so interesting.
Yes. I love that scene too.
But my favorite sort of funny scene, because it's not a comedy, so it's not like it's there's a roll of jokes. I really like the scene, not because of the great humor, but I just think it moves along really nicely when Kat and Jamie are trapped in the car. The car is broken down, and they're insulting each other. And they just seem to go on, and it's clear the two like each other tremendously. I mean, they're supposedly these sworn enemies that don't get along, but clearly they are meant to be. I was always a fan of that pairing.
Yeah, we are
clearly,
too. Yeah.
and that the fact that they could banter back and forth like that in a time of great stress, I really enjoyed. So anyway, that's all I'm thinking of right now.
No, we love Kat and Jamie together.
We do. So did you know when season 1 ended that there would be a second season? And did you already know that would be on the end? Well, I guess Teen Nick is what it's called now. When I watched it, it was the end.
Yeah. No, you never know. You hope, and we thought we'd done a good job, but we had to go back to the broadcast executives and come out. And basically what you want to do at the end of a first season or any season is go back and do a deep dive. We know what worked, but what didn't work and why didn't it work? So we were talking earlier about, well, why didn't I'm in Love with My Guitar work? At least in my opinion. Other people might love the episode, but in my opinion. And so you'd talk about those things and say, well, the storyline with the parents, it was just taking us away. It was pulling us out of the thing. So maybe going forward, we just won't have as much of that going on, make those kind of tweaks. And this character, we sort of played out that storyline. We can't do it too much more. It's sort of reached a dead end. So let's move on and try and do something. So and then you have to pitch it to the broadcaster. In this case, 2 broadcasters in the States and in Canada. And I wrote about this in my book. One of my favorite memories was every year I would go 2 or 3 times a year. This sounds like it's a really rough job. I would have to go to the south of France, to Cannes. Because there's 3 festivals going that of the Cannes Film Festival. I actually wasn't going there, but there's 2 television festivals, one in the spring and one in the fall, and there's a music festival. So I would go. Some years I'd go to all 3, or I'd go to at least one of them. And even before, I'm pretty sure this was before we were ordered on even the first season. We'd been ordered by CTV in Canada, but we hadn't been ordered by whatever they were called then, the N or Teen Nick. And at the same time, Teen Nick had ordered Degrassi, but CTV hadn't ordered season, which would have been Degrassi season 4 or season 5, I guess, or somewhere around there. But CTV hadn't ordered it. So I did something which I normally wouldn't do. I like to keep the broadcasters separated from each other because it's very handy to be able to say when one broadcaster wants one thing, but I don't think CTV likes that. Could we do it this way, or vice versa? So I'm happy if they don't talk to each other all that much. But they were both attending at Cannes. So I arranged this dinner at this really posh restaurant. It was in a place called Saint Antoine Bastide or something like that. The Rolling Stones a few years earlier had bought it out for the summer and had just lived there and written things. But it was a great restaurant. And I made a reservation there for the 2 CTV execs, the N execs, and myself. And we confirmed and confirmed. I confirmed on the day. Then somehow, I have no idea how this happened. When I got out there, and I got out there an hour early, because, this was an important meeting. What I was hoping was that, it would rub off, that the other broadcaster had already ordered it, so I should order it too. Of course, the danger was that they'd say, oh, you haven't ordered that. Maybe I shouldn't have ordered it or something like that. But I was hoping that, a romantic dinner in the south of France would bring everybody together. And when I got there, they did not have the reservation, and they were full. I said, it's impossible. We've confirmed something. I'm speaking in I speak French not that badly, but not fantastically. So I'm speaking in French and trying to do this, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is the end of my life as we now know it.
Oh no!
We went on and we went on, But I hung out there because maybe somebody would cancel. And so I was sitting in the sort of in the back because they didn't want me in the front pacing around, and I was looking out over this sort of little courtyard with little statues in it and sort of things like that. And I went up to the desk, and they still didn't know. So I went back, and I was looking up, and I thought, wait a minute. Then I went back to the desk, and I said, is there any kind of extra table that we could get and put it out in the courtyard? And, just put, it doesn't have to be the same fancy china or whatever. It could be kitchen china. I don't care. Just put it out there and do that. And they said, well, okay, yeah, we could do that. So we had what turned out to be this beautiful private dinner in this little courtyard with the moon rising over Cannes, drinking champagne, having a wonderful time. And at the end of the evening, both shows were ordered for the next season.
Amazing.
That's awesome.
So that's the hard life of a television producer, having to drink champagne in beautiful locations in the south of France.
I love how season 1 kind of wraps itself up. If there was never a second season, it ends quite nicely for all of the characters anyway.
Yeah. And that's broadcasters like that. And unless it's absolutely certain that you're going to have another season, you don't want to leave people with a dead body floating in the swimming pool, or a body and you don't even know whether it's dead or alive or something like that. No.
What's your favorite memory from season 1? It can be like filming, on set, writing, anything.
Oh, certainly the songwriter camps. And, Alex was part of them, but they were working on the music, the songwriter camps, and those Friday evenings with the barbecues, with the cast there. It was just marvelous. It was family. And you talk about vulnerability. Here are people who they've written something, and for the first time they're playing it, and they're not just playing it for one other person, they're playing it for 30 other people. And so you've got Alex there, you've got, the songwriters, you've got the script writers, everybody's there. Linda and I are there. We've just had a nice meal. The sun is setting. And you say, oh God, we've got these great songs to work on and build on. That's my favorite memory.
I love that. Well, we've had a few fan questions.
Okay.
So Jackie asked, what do you think of the age gap now between Jude and Tommy through more of a 2022 lens? Because, I've always said I don't see a problem with the age gap, but now that people watch the show, they seem to think that it's more of an issue.
Well, I think it's an issue, and I think it was an issue back in the time. That was part of the tension. Tommy was, when he said, I'm the wrong, whatever his line was, I'm the wrong person to ask, which is a scene that I love. By the way, of course, we've got hoses up on top with the rain coming down and things like that. But they were troopers during that scene. They're getting soaked while they're doing the scene. But that's a real thing. He does not want to be there. Nobody wants, except everybody wants, but nobody wants the two of them to be together. There's a rule that, I think it was around back in the time when we were doing it, which I always thought was very funny. It's actually sort of kind of true if you work it out. And I don't know whether it came from Seinfeld or whether it was an urban rule, but you can date somebody who's half your age plus 7. So if you're 22 years old, you can date an 18-year-old. You can't date a 17-year-old or a 16-year-old or a 15-year-old. So that sort of says it in the nutshell. So Jamie and Jude can date. I forget how old Shay was, but I think he was younger than Tommy. Tommy's been around, so probably Shay and Jude can date, but not Tommy and Jude.
Yeah. That's a good
so that's a problem, and particularly when you've got a position where you've got a producer, which is sort of a position of power. It's like a teacher and a student or something like that. So it's an issue, and you don't want it to happen. At the same time, by the way, one of my favorite lines, and this will not be your favorite line because I'll bet you don't remember it. It was at the beginning, it was probably at the beginning of I'm in Love with My Guitar. The chemistry teacher, just as the credits are rolling right at the very beginning of the show, the chemistry teacher is handing out exams. And I think Jude got a 6 or something like that. But he's talking to the students as he's handing out the results of this thing. And he says something like, but it's, you got to know, you just can't fake chemistry. And he goes on. And to me, of course, chemistry meant the chemistry between Jude and Tommy, or the chemistry between Jamie and Jude, or Kat and Jamie, whatever. It was all about the chemistry, and you can't fake it.
I love that.
So there's obvious chemistry between Johnny, but it shouldn't be. Now, by the time you get to, let's just do the math. In episode 4, add 3. So let's say Tommy is 25. So half of 25 is 12 and a half, plus 7 is 19 and a half. So I think Jude is getting right on that, to the Seinfeld rule. So, so that could be okay.
Yeah.
Jackie also asked, was the original intent in season 1 for Jude and Tommy to end up together? Did that grow because of the fan reaction?
No, we always knew that the series would be about Jude and Tommy. There was a show that you may or may not have heard of. I forget who was in it, but it was quite a well-known show back in the day called Moonlighting. And there were, if you look it up, there were 2 key characters, and you knew from the moment that they should be together, but they never got together, because the moment they got together, the show was over. So we knew we could never bring Jude and Tommy if once they were absolutely irrevocably together. I mean, if they got married or something like that, okay, well, the entire tension of the show is gone. So we knew we couldn't bring them together, but we also knew we couldn't break them apart. So that was just how the show carried on.
That makes me so happy.
Yes. And then Colo asked, why wasn't Criminal featured in the series but was on the season 1 album?
Sorry, repeat the question.
Why wasn't Criminal featured in the series but was on the season 1 soundtrack?
That's interesting, and I don't remember. I know. I think was Criminal. Was that an Alex song? Did he co-write
I think
that?
so.
Was.
Yeah. There were. I suspect it was a timing thing, that we had to make certain choices to get to the press. And another interesting thing in the show, 24 Hours was called 24/48, which is, I think, how it was originally written. But by the time the show came, it was 24 hours. So things just changed all the way along. And maybe we'd thought that Criminal would be in the show. Maybe it would, we'd save it for next year, and it just didn't work out or something. But by then we'd already gone to press.
Yeah. And then the final fan question, which is not really a season 1 question, but everyone always wants to know, will all the Instant Star music ever be re-released with Alex singing all of the songs?
There's a couple of things on that. And I think, I'm, perfectly fine with it. And I think Alex is fine with it. The one thing Alex, of course, wants to do is, she's working on a new album now and is keep the focus on her new music. But I think she'd be fine with it. We don't own the company anymore, so we'd have to talk what is now Wild Brain into doing things. To my mind, and it may be a 1 in 1,000 or probably more like a 1 in 1,000,000 shot. If we were ever to bring an Instant Star back, that would be the time to do it. If we were ever able to do it, by the way, we couldn't do it as a few months later. It would have to be 10 years later, and people have moved on. we can all have our own thoughts about where different characters might be. Is Sadie running G Major Records now? Who knows? And yes, and what is it? Is Tommy now like a Michael Bublé crooner? Sort of doing that. Who knows where we're at? But that would be sort of a fun package to do at the time. And if you were ever to bring it back, there would need to be new instant stars. In other words, it would no longer be the story of Jude, and Jude and Tommy could be in it, but they would be the quote the parents, and not necessarily the parents, but there would be a crop of a new instant star that came across, and maybe a new instant star each year. Who knows? Yeah. But something like that. But I think it would be fun, and maybe they would sing some of the songs and we'd put them out and have the original Alex version and their version or something like that. So I'm in favor of, keeping Alex's musical progress now sort of focused on her career. I mean, that's up to her. I'd be okay with it, but it would be a fair amount of detective work and convincing Wildbrain that it's a good idea. But if there were a new instant star coming out, I think we could convince Wildbrain of almost anything. They would just be so pleased.
Well, there you go.
Yes.
Stephen, thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful to chat with you.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, because it's been a number of years, as you can tell. And so sort of reliving some of the memories has been a joy for me.
Thank you. And we hope that you'll want to come back and talk about season 2.
Absolutely. I'll see you next year, same time.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to The Breakdown, an Instant Star Rewatch podcast. The Breakdown was produced by me, Chloe, and Neon Network Production. Make sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter, and listen to all episodes of The Breakdown on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. See you next time.